That's very, very harsh. I know that that's hard to hear, and that's extremely challenging. And in a certain way, our theology today doesn't so much say God does send people to hell. That is, hell is not God's rejection of us. Hell is our rejection of God. And so there's a tendency in contemporary theology to say God doesn't send people to hell, people go to hell. But there's a sense in which if you're in hell, God has affirmed your choice. God has said, okay, you made a final irrevocable choice, and there it is. Now, we don't know what what the mechanisms of that are, or who goes or who doesn't go. But the Pope is saying that there's two sides to this problem. One, we expect God to justify himself before us. We don't expect to have to justify ourselves before God. And the other side of it is, we don't believe in damnation anymore. Yet, Pope Benedict said, there still exists a general perception that we need grace and pardon. For me, it is one of the signs of the times that the idea of God's mercy is becoming increasingly central and dominant in Christian thought. St. Faustina Kowalska's promotion of the Divine Mercy devotion and the writings of St. John Paul II, he says, even if it did not always emerge in an explicit way, both gave a strong push to popular Christian focus on mercy and to theological explorations of the theme. So he says the theological theme of our times is this idea of mercy. And here's his take on Pope Francis. Pope Francis, he said, is in complete agreement with this line. His pastoral practice is expressed precisely in the fact that he speaks continually of God's mercy. That's Pope Benedict's word. So, in other words, the Pope is saying, the problem with the world is, essentially, or the problem in the church is, really, we don't think of having to justify ourselves before God, and we don't believe in the possibility of damnation. And he says, okay, that may not be explicitly what people believe, but that's the tendency in our belief, is to minimize those things. And so he says, here comes St. Faustina and Pope John Paul and Pope Francis all talking about mercy. And he says, why? Why would they be talking about mercy in a world that doesn't think it needs to justify itself before God, and in a world that doesn't believe in damnation or doesn't really fear damnation? And he says the reason that they're talking so much about mercy, and in a sense, I think what he's implying is the reason the Holy Spirit is leading the church to talk so much about mercy, is that even though we think these thoughts about God having to justify himself and there being no hell or whatever, inside we still feel that something is wrong. Pope Benedict says that under the patina of self-assurance, and because my wife loves antiques, I know what patina is. Patina is the covering on a piece of furniture. So under the patina of self-assurance, man today hides a deep awareness of his wounds and his lack of worthiness before God. He is waiting for mercy. So the Pope Emeritus, Benedict, is trying, I think, in this thing to give us a context to think about how St. Faustina Kowalska, how the Divine Mercy devotion and the Divine Mercy approach to the world, including the Divine Mercy image, and how the papacy of Pope John Paul II and then the papacy of Pope Francis are all pushing us in the same direction. That we're not thinking right about who we are and where we are, but if we listen to our feelings, we know that we need mercy. We know we need it. We are before a profound evolution of dogma, Pope Benedict said, in the second half of the last century. An awareness that God cannot allow perdition of all non-baptized was completely affirmed. That is, he's saying God doesn't condemn and damn everyone who's not a Catholic or who's not baptized. We know that now. Okay? That has become clear. But he's saying knowing that is not the same as thinking it's not important that people get the good news, or it's not important whether people are baptized. And he's saying we're still working that out. We do want to affirm, in other words, that God can save every person who responds to his call in their heart and in their actions. But that doesn't mean that we should get lazy about sharing the good news, or about proposing baptism into Christ for the whole world. A little more on that, and then we'll talk about